Alright, it's Friday, April 19th, currently the third day of being at Reno. Currently hopping out of my room at the Grand Sierra Resort. Arrived on Wednesday around just before midnight. Put in a short cash game session, nothing major to report. And actually played the most expensive event yesterday, the $1,100 bounty event. So gonna go and run through some of the hands from that particular tournament. Alright, so it was an $1,100 bounty tournament, 20K starting chips, 30-minute levels, and the way it works is that anytime a player gets knocked out, you get $500. So a pretty good return anytime you knock out a player. Alright, first notable hand comes at the blind levels of 100, 300 with a 300 big blind ante. And it was a very interesting hand because I get to play against Chris Moneymaker, 2003 World Series of Poker Main Event Champion. Chris is in the cutoff and he opens it to 800. I call in the small blind with King of Diamonds, Jack of Clubs, and the big blind calls as well. So we go through ways to a flop of Queen 9 Deuce, 2 spades, checks over to Chris, and he puts out a continuation bet of 1,300. Seeing as I got a gut shot here and some bounty considerations, I decide to make the call and the big blind fold. The turn is a 4 of diamonds and it goes check, check, and the river is an ace of diamonds. And I check it over to Chris and he puts out a bet of 4K, leaving only 2,700 back. And this is where it gets kind of interesting because I do have the King of Diamonds on my hand, so I know Chris can't have the nuts here. And while he only has 2,700 back, the question becomes, do I have enough fold equity here if I put them all in? And I think in this very rare case, I do because of the bounty considerations. So in theory, I'm gonna wanna be putting it in only when I have it so that I can collect his $500. And in knowing that and knowing that Chris knows that, I ultimately decide to jam it in there despite him only having so few chips left. But I'm thinking that it's such a unique spot that it can probably work. And he tanks for quite a while. He exchanges some really fun and pleasant dialogue as he's tanking. And he ultimately decides on a fold. And so yeah, it was nice to get that bluff through. And Chris was actually kind enough to kind of give his thoughts on that hand that we played.
You suck, Andrew. So me and Andrew were playing in a hand, and this move has only been pulled on me, like I told Andrew one time in my life. Jungle Man pulled it on me at the NBC Heads Up a long time ago. He raised, I had like 90% of my chips in the middle, and he decided to punt it off. He re-raised me and put me all in with King High, and I was value betting a pair of aces when it hit on the river, and somehow I folded the hand because he's a fish, and I thought there's no way he could pull this move off. I didn't think he was a good enough player. Still not sure if he is, but
probably not.
I was impressed with the move. He showed me the hand, and people show me their hands when they bluff me all the time, but I respect this play because it was a tough play for him to make, and yeah, he got one. So for your vlog, good hand, Andrew. You still fucking suck.
So yeah, grateful to have had a very priceless kind of experience that really is awesome, because I think that's really what Run It Up Reno is about, and it's to create a more fun atmosphere for poker, and I definitely had my fair share of that in the early goings of this tournament. Alright, another notable hand takes place at the 400, 800, 800 level. Folds to the hijack, and he's got 3K left, and he decides to jam all in. I'm in the cutoff with ace-8 offsuit, and I think I should be ahead of his jamming range quite a bit here, given the late position dynamics. And because there's a bounty consideration, I decide to try and isolate, and I go all in for 17K. And unfortunately, the small blind who covers the both of us decides to make the call. The hijack turns over queen-9 of diamonds, and the small blind player turns over jack-deuce offsuit. The board runs out jack-10, 7, 10. So get knocked out here. The jack-deuce small blind player collects 2 bounties, and this is a re-entry tournament. I thought about it for a little while and ultimately decided to re-enter and fired another $1,100 bullet. So get a new 20K chip stack, and I get seated at a new and different table, dwindle down a little bit to about 15K, where this next hand picks up. It's 500, 1K, 1K, and I'm in the cutoff with pocket 5s, and I decide to go with it, put it all in, and it folds to the big blind, who makes a quick snap call. And the reason for the snap call, which I learned after, is that he thought I only had 3,500. So nevertheless, he got the money in there. He turns over 4-7 offsuit, and the board runs out ace-10, 5, 5 deuce. So make quads to get the nice double up here. All right, next hand I've got about 30K. Folds to me in the cutoff, and I've got king-10 offsuit, and I decide to bump it to 2.5K. Folds over to the same big blind player as the previous hand, and he decides to make the call. We go heads up to a flop of queen-7 for 2 spades. He decides to check, and I don't have too much here, but I do have some backdoor equity. And so given that it's a pretty sticky player, I decide not to continuation bet here and just take the free card, so I check. Turns a good card is a jack of clubs, so I make an open-ended straight draw here. He leads this time for 1.5K, pretty good price to draw here, so I call. And the river comes a blank deuce of spades. So he decides to bet 4.5K, and I just find a quick fold. All right, next hand I'm in middle position with pocket 7s, and I bump it to 2.5K. The low jack and the big blind make the call, so we go 3 ways to a flop of jack 7, 3, 2 clubs. Checks it over to me, and I decide to put out a half pot continuation bet, and both players fold. So not too much going on here, but at least pick up a little bit of chips to build the stack a bit. All right, next hand is at the 600, 1200, 1200 level. There's an early position raised to 2.5K. I'm in middle position. I've got about 30K, and I've got ace-8 of clubs, and I decide to just call, and the big blind calls as well. We go 3 ways to a flop of 10, 8, 7, 2 diamonds. It checks through. The turn brings an 8, so I make trip 8s here. And the big blind player leads out for 3.5K. And early position player folds, and I ultimately decide to call here. I'm not sure if that's the best play here, but looking back on it, it's probably better to raise given how draw heavy the board was. The river comes a 4 of diamonds. Looks like a pretty blank card here. He decides to bet 7K, and I actually don't even really consider raising because I'm just not really sure what worse hands I can get value from at this point if I were to raise, even though my hand is relatively strong. And sure enough, he turns over 5-6 offsuit for the rivered straights. So yeah, I assume if he had bricked the river, he was probably going to fire since he has no showdown value. But as it turns out, he makes the straights, and I didn't increase the price for him to see the river, so that passive line on the turn certainly cost me. And even to a certain degree, playing passive pre-flop had cost me here. So definitely a learning spot here to, obviously find more aggression in certain spots, particularly in tournaments. All right, next hand takes place at the 8-16-16 level, and there's a cutoff open to 3.5K. On the button is Kevin Martin, a well-known poker player and streamer on Twitch and part of the Run It Up team. He decides to jam it all in for about 40K, gets to me on the button in the position right after, and I've got queen 10 of hearts. I've only got 5.4K, so just about 3.5 or so big blinds, and I decide to jam in, and the other player folds. The board runs out ace queen 8, 4, jack. So get the nice double up. About 50 players left at this point from the starting field of 176. This next hand takes place at the 1-2-2 level. I'm in early position with pocket 5s, and I shove it in there. I've got 14K, and it gets over to the small blind. He over jams for about 50K, and the big blind tanks for a little while and calls for a little bit less, for around 45K. The small blind table is king queen offsuit, and big blind has ace 6 offsuit, and the board runs out ace 5 4, 7, king. So get the nice triple up for the main pot, and the big blind hits his ace against the king queen, so he takes the other pot. This next hand takes place at 12, 24, 24. Under the gun raises to 5.5k. I'm under the gun +1 with pocket 10s. I've got about 20 big blinds. Just recently accumulated some of those chips as from the previous hands. And I think it's definitely the correct play to be probably 3-betting or shipping here, but I take the passive line yet again, and I just call. Everyone else folds, so we go heads up to a flop of queen, queen, deuce, rainbow. It checks through. The turn brings a 3 of clubs, and he checks it again, so I'm feeling pretty good. I don't think he'd be checking on 2 streets with a hand like jacks or better, so I go for some value. I bet 5k, and he makes a pretty quick call. The river is a beautiful card. It's a 10 of spades, so I fill up here. He checks yet again, and I settle on a bet of 10k, and he tanks for quite a while and ultimately decides on a call. So take this one down. Our next hand, I'm in early position with pocket 9s, and I raise it to 5.5k, and only the small blind calls. So we heads up to a flop of 7, 6, deuce, 2 hearts. He checks it, I bet 5k, and he calls. The turn brings an 8 of hearts, so a really interesting card. I make the open-ended straight draw plus a flush draw here, and I kind of feel like I have the hand locked up given that I blocked the straights and flushes here. And so when he checks it though, I decide kind of to check it as well for a couple reasons. One being a little bit of pot control, just in case, and 2 for a little bit of deception, as I don't think I'm afraid of too many cards hitting the river. Obviously some picture cards can come out, but as played, the river brings a 10 of spades, and he bets out rather quickly this time to the tune of 17k. I just make the quick call, and he turns over king 4 of spades for air here, so take it down for a nice pot. So yeah, not too much else happens the rest of this level and even the next, I believe. And we make it to dinner break with 32 players left. And yeah, so for dinner break, I went ahead and met up with my friend Dennis, who was playing in the cash games. We ended up going over to Oceano, which is the sushi restaurant inside Peppermill, and had a great meal. Just did the all you can eat, and all the fish and the sushi was super fresh. So it was nice to kind of have that time to kind of decompress a little bit, not think about poker for an hour. It was nice to essentially dwindle down to, I think, 4 or 5 big blinds at one point, and having, you know, anywhere from like 5k to 10k. And when I hit dinner break, I actually reached, I think, around the 100k mark. So feeling pretty good, having grinded it out, taking a very Phil Hellmuth type style in terms of playing super tight and nitty to a certain degree to have navigated the field up to this point. So all that said, was feeling pretty good in terms of confidence, obviously, to have nursed the stack the whole time and ready to get back in there. All right, so we hop back in there. The field dwindled down quite a bit pretty fast. It went from 32 players to about 23 or so in the first half hour. And this next hand picks up at the 244 level. Cutoff raises it to 8k, so a min raise. I'm on the button with pocket kings, and I've got about 90k to start this hand, and I put in a 3-bet to 20k. Probably could have sized up a little bit, but in that moment I felt like it was okay, and it falls back over to the cutoff, and he makes the call. So we'll go heads up to a flop of 9, 7, 3, 2 clubs. He checks it. I put out a down continuation bet of 13k. Again, not loving my sizing here looking back. I think it's sometimes just autopilot because I'm playing so much more cash games to be traditionally down betting in some spots as it relates to cash games and 3-bet pots, but I think given the tournament considerations, I should have sized up maybe more along the lines of 18 or 20,000, which was closer to my initial pre-flop 3-bet raise. But all that said, he decides to call. And here's where it gets interesting. The turn is a queen of clubs, so the front door flush completes, and he tanks for quite a while, to the point of looking like he was going to try to bet, but he ultimately decided to check. And admittedly, this play confused me quite a bit, and given that we're getting so close to the money bubble, I didn't want to put myself in a position to be wrong and cost my tournament life. And while that's probably a wrong way of looking at it to a certain degree, I just felt like since I was one of the shorter stacks throughout the tournament and I've made it this far, I kind of wanted to see if I could just squeeze through to make it in the money. And so I checked back. And the river brings a 10 of clubs. So 4 card flush out there. And I do have the king of clubs, so the only card that beats me is the ace of clubs. And Cutoff decides to bet 13k on this card, and definitely screams to me like he does have the ace of clubs here, but given that I got the king of clubs, I decide to call, and sure enough, he turns over ace king offsuit with the ace of clubs. So lose this hand, leaving about 40,000 or so left. And after this hand, I was definitely one of the shortest stacks in the room with about 20 or so players left, and did a good job, I think, to nurse that stack throughout. Ultimately found myself winning an all-in one time with ace-9 against, I think, 5-6 offsuit. I think the ace-high held. And we got down to 19 players, so just one more player until we all make the money. And there were literally 8 all-ins from shorter stacks, and unfortunately for me, they all doubled up. So it was starting to feel like destiny that it might be me that was on the money bubble, but I was still trying to play through it to the best that I could and nurse the stack and try to find good spots. And so we get to blinds at 3-6-6. All three tables are playing hand for hand, of course, at this point, being on the money bubble. I pick up pocket sevens in the under the gun position, and I've got 38K, so about 6.5 big blinds. I decide to put it all in there. It folds over to the button, who ultimately decides to call, and small and big blind fold. So tournament life at risk here, and the button has ace-9 offsuit. The board runs out king, jack, jack, so good fade on the flop here. Unfortunately, the turn is another king, so get counterfeited here, looking to hit a 7 on the river to try to stay in the tournament, and the river is a 4 of diamonds. So unfortunately get knocked out in this fashion. I'm the official Stone Cold bubble for this tournament, and that wraps things up for this particular tournament. And there was actually another player on the other table that was all in. He had more chips than me, so if he had gotten knocked out, then he would have actually cashed, and I would have felt really bad, because if I knew he was all in, I probably would have folded and hoped that he had gotten busted, obviously, so that I could creep into the money. But as it turns out, he doubled up, so it was kind of an inconsequential thing to have considered folding. So a rough way to end the tournament. I didn't collect any bounties, so was in for the full $2,200 and get knocked out on the Stone Cold bubble. First time ever in all of the tournaments that I played, but I guess it's bound to happen at some point. And so that kind of wraps things up for this vlog in the tournament. The final table is actually playing today. First place is going to be $20,000, so not too hefty of a first place prize, but that's because of the dispersion of all of the bounty money. And today's actually the kickoff of the main event, the $600 main event. And I'm actually not going to play that one. I got to head back into San Francisco on Saturday evening. So that wraps things up for this vlog. I haven't done too many cash game vlogs lately. It's been mostly tournaments, with the exception of the Stones live stream, and that one was of course a little bit different given that it was a 3-game mix. So I'm gonna hop into the cash games now to finish out my trip. We'll try to get in a couple sessions tonight before dinner and after dinner, and maybe even one tomorrow morning. So we'll certainly have some hands from the cash games to share with you all, and so we'll go ahead and do that after this one.